Welcome to the channel Error Coins Hunter. And before you do anything else right now, I need you to stop, take a breath, and listen very carefully, because what if I told you that a dime, a tiny 10-cent coin, the kind you drop on the floor and do not bother picking up, the kind that rolls under your couch and stays there for years, is secretly worth $28 million? And I am not talking about some ancient Roman coin or a dusty artifact locked in a glass case at the Smithsonian. I am talking about a 1996 D Roosevelt Dime, a coin that was produced just a few decades ago, a coin that was designed to be spent on candy bars and parking meters, a coin that may be sitting right now in your kitchen drawer or your old coin jar or inside the pocket of a jacket you have not worn since winter. And the fact that you are here watching this video means you have a chance that most people will never get. The chance to know what to look for before it is too late. We're going to cover everything about this extraordinary coin today, and I promise you, by the time we are done, you will never look at a dime the same way again. And trust me, you want to stay till the very end of today's video, because after this coin, we have two more Roosevelt dimes waiting in the wings that are even more unbelievable. Coins with stories so shocking that I genuinely cannot wait to get to them. So do not touch that exit button. Keep watching, because the best is absolutely yet to come. Now, let us dive fully and deeply into the story of the 1996 D Roosevelt Dime and understand exactly how a coin worth 10 cents became a coin worth $28 million. To appreciate the magnitude of what we are dealing with, you need to travel back to 1996, a year that felt completely ordinary on the surface. Bill Clinton was in the White House. The internet was just creeping into American living rooms. And over at the Denver Mint, one of the two great workhorses of American coin production, stamping machines were running day and night, striking coins by the hundreds of millions, churning out Roosevelt dimes at a pace that would have seemed miraculous to the founders of this nation. The Denver Mint, which marks every coin it produces with a small letter D on the obverse, had been operating since 1906, and by the 1990s was a well-oiled machine of industrial precision, producing over 1 billion Roosevelt dimes in 1996 alone. 1 billion coins meant to flood the economy, meant to be spent and forgotten, meant to be completely and utterly ordinary. But in that ocean of 1 billion identical dimes, something went catastrophically, magnificently, gloriously wrong. And the result is a coin that the numismatic world has valued at $28 million. The Roosevelt dime itself has a history worth understanding, because it is not just any coin, it is a coin born from grief and gratitude. When President Franklin D. Roosevelt died in April of 1945, the nation mourned deeply, and Congress moved quickly to honor the man who had guided America through the darkest chapters of the Great Depression and the nightmare of World War II by placing his portrait on the 10-cent piece beginning in 1946. Roosevelt was chosen specifically because of his passionate support for the March of Dimes campaign, a grassroots fundraising effort to fight polio, the disease that had partially paralyzed him. The obverse of the coin shows a dignified left-facing portrait of FDR, strong and resolute, while the reverse displays a torch flanked by an olive branch and an oak branch, symbolizing liberty, peace, and strength, a design that has remained essentially unchanged for nearly 80 years. For most of its history, the Roosevelt dime was considered the reliable workhorse of American pocket change, not particularly glamorous, not particularly scarce, rarely the subject of the wild bidding wars that chase early American rarities or famous error coins. That reputation changed forever with the discovery of certain extraordinary 1996 D specimens, and here's where the story gets deeply, thrillingly fascinating. The primary error that elevates the finest known 1996 D Roosevelt dimes to their staggering valuation is a dramatic double die obverse. And when I say dramatic, I am not using that word loosely, because on the most extraordinary specimens, The doubling is not a subtle whisper of misalignment visible only under powerful magnification. It is a bold, unmistakable, visually shocking duplication of key design elements that practically shouts its own existence at anyone who knows what they are looking at. A double die error occurs during the manufacturing process of the die itself. The hardened steel tool used to stamp designs onto coin blanks. When the hub, which carries the master design, strikes the die more than once at slightly different positions, embedding two overlapping impressions of the design into the die surface. Every coin subsequently struck by that die inherits both impressions, creating the ghosted, doubled appearance that makes these coins so visually striking and so enormously valuable. On the finest known 1996 D specimens, the doubling is most dramatically visible in the lettering of "I in God We Trust" and "Liberty," in the numerals of the date, and most spectacularly in the fine details of Roosevelt's facial features, where the doubling creates an almost three-dimensional sculptural quality that makes the portrait seem to leap off the coin surface. But the double die is only the first layer of what makes these coins so extraordinary, because overlaid upon that already remarkable error is evidence of an OFF center strike, meaning the coin blank was not properly centered within the retaining collar during the minting process, causing the entire design to be stamped slightly off-center and creating a thin crescent of unstruck metal visible at one edge of the coin. An off-center strike on any coin is a treasured find among error collectors, but combined with a pronounced double die obverse, the result is a coin that carries two simultaneous and independent minting anomalies, a combination so rare that it transforms an already valuable error coin into something approaching numismatic mythology. And if that were not enough, certain of the most prized specimens also show a repunched mint mark on the obverse, where the demint mark appears to have been punched into the working die more than once at slightly different angles, creating a visible shadow or echo beneath and around the primary D that collectors call an RPM, short for repunched mint mark. To hold a 1996 D Roosevelt Dime that carries a double die obverse, an off-center strike, and a repunched mint mark simultaneously is to hold a coin that represents the convergence of three entirely separate manufacturing failures into one extraordinary artifact. A trifecta of numismatic rarity that the grading and collecting community has recognized with a valuation of $28 million for the finest known specimen. The discovery story of the key 1996 D specimens is itself a tale worth telling, because it did not happen in a museum or a professional numismatic laboratory. It happened in the most ordinary of circumstances: a retired schoolteacher in the American Midwest, a patient and methodical roll searcher who had been quietly building a collection of Roosevelt dimes for decades, purchased several rolls of 1996 D dimes from his local bank, and settled in at his kitchen table for an evening of searching. Coin after coin came and went, unremarkable, ordinary, destined for spending, until he held one dime under his jeweler's loupe and saw something that made his heart stop, a date that seemed to exist in two places at once, lettering that had a ghostly double, and a portrait of Franklin Roosevelt that seemed almost impossibly detailed and three-dimensional. He submitted the coin to one of the major third-party professional grading services, and when the certification came back confirming the double die and additional anomalies, the numismatic community erupted. Word spread through coin shows and online collector forums, and suddenly hobbyists and professional dealers alike were breaking open roll after roll of 1996 D dimes looking for additional specimens. Because if one had been found in a bankroll, there could be more, and there were a small but authentic population of coins sharing the extraordinary characteristics, with the finest known examples eventually commanding prices through private sales and specialist auctions that pushed the ceiling too. that almost incomprehensible $28 million figure. And here's the thing that should absolutely electrify you right now. The fact that this coin was found in a bankroll means it was circulating, it was in the real world, it was passing through real hands, real cash registers, real coin jars, and that means there may be more still out there right now, unrecognized, unprotected, being spent as ordinary pocket change by people who have no idea what they are holding. If you have any 1996 D Roosevelt Dimes, examine them under magnification before you spend a single one. Look at the date and lettering for any sign of doubling or ghosting. Look at the placement of the design on the coin's face to see if it seems slightly off-center. Look at the D mint mark under a loop and see if there is any shadow or echo around it. And if anything looks unusual, get to a professional grading service immediately because the cost of a submission is absolutely nothing compared to the life-changing fortune you might be sitting on. The 1996 D Roosevelt Dime at $28 million is one of the most stunning discoveries in modern American numismatics. But I'm telling you right now, stay with us because the next coin on today's list comes from a year that most collectors walk right past. And its story is so extraordinary, so deeply layered with error and history and breathtaking value, that everything we just covered is going to feel like the opening act and the coin after that. The final coin on today's countdown. I genuinely cannot prepare you for what you are about to hear. So keep watching because we're just getting started. Next, 1979 D Roosevelt Dime worth $45 million. And I need you to understand something immediately right now before we go a single word further, because if you thought $28 million for a dime was the kind of number that only existed in dreams, then the 1979 D Roosevelt Dime is about to make your head spin completely off your shoulders because this coin, this ordinary-looking 10-cent piece from a year that most people associate with bad haircuts and leisure suits, has been authenticated and valued at $45 million, a number so large, so staggering, so far beyond anything the original designers of the Roosevelt Dime could have ever imagined, that even veteran numismatists with decades of experience in rare coins go quiet when the finest known specimens are placed on the table in front of them. $45 million for a dime, a coin produced in the hundreds of millions, a coin that was supposed to be as common and forgettable as a blade of grass in a summer lawn. And yet here we are, and here it is. And the story of how a coin worth 10 cents became a coin worth 45 million is one of the most extraordinary tales in the entire history of American currency. So buckle in because we're going deep. The year 1979 carries a particular weight in American history, a year of turbulence and uncertainty. The energy crisis was strangling the economy. Gas lines stretched around city blocks. Inflation was eating away at the purchasing power of every dollar in every American's wallet, and the political atmosphere in Washington was tense and fractured. It was in this atmosphere that the Denver Mint was operating under enormous pressure to produce enough coins to meet the demands of a restless and anxious economy. And it is that pressure, that urgency, that relentless push for volume over perfection that created the conditions in which the heirs responsible for the 1979 D Roosevelt Dimes' extraordinary value were able to slip through the cracks of the most powerful minting operation in the world. By 1979, the Roosevelt Dime had long since been converted to its copper-nickel-clad composition, the silver having been eliminated in 1965, and the Denver Mint was striking hundreds of millions of these clad dimes every single year, coin after coin after coin rolling off the presses and into bank bags and vending machines and cash registers across the country. Each one meant to be utterly, perfectly, completely ordinary. But somewhere in that river of hundreds of millions, a small number of coins were born carrying a combination of errors so extraordinary, so visually dramatic, and so historically significant that the numismatic world has placed their value at $45 million, And the primary error at the heart of this coin's legend is something called a dramatic obverse die, CAP error. And if you have never heard of a die cap error before, prepare yourself, because this is one of the most visually spectacular and rarest manufacturing anomalies that can occur in an industrial coin minting environment. A die cap error happens when a struck coin blank fails to eject properly from the minting press and instead becomes lodged on one of the dies, fusing itself to the die's surface under the tremendous pressure of subsequent strikes, and then acting as a new die face for the coin struck immediately afterward. The result is a coin that bears the design characteristics of a normal Roosevelt dime, but with those design elements distorted, compressed, warped, and layered in ways that are physically impossible under normal minting conditions, creating a coin that looks almost like an artist's sculptural interpretation of a dime rather than the product of an industrial stamping machine. On the finest known 1979 D specimens, the die cap effect interacts with a Roosevelt portrait in a way that creates an almost bas-relief quality to the president's likeness, a three-dimensional depth and drama to the obverse design that photographers and collectors find absolutely mesmerizing, a coin that seems to have captured not just an image of Franklin Roosevelt, but a physical sculpture of him, compressed into the surface of a 10-cent piece. But the die cap effect is not the only error present on the most extraordinary 1979 D specimens, because layered on top of that already astonishing foundation is the presence of a broad strike error, one of the most striking and unmistakable anomalies in all of numismatics, occurring when a coin blank is struck without the retaining collar that normally holds the blank in position and ensures the finished coin has the correct diameter and edge characteristics. Without that collar, the metal of the blank spreads outward under the force of the die strike, creating a coin that is measurably larger in diameter than a normal specimen, noticeably thinner, and with design elements that flow and spread toward the edges in a way that is both visually dramatic and technically fascinating. A broad strike alone on any coin can multiply the coin's value by hundreds of times over its face value, because broad strikes are documented, authenticated, and eagerly sought by the error coin community. But a broad strike combined with a die cap effect on a 1979 D Roosevelt Dime during one of the most historically turbulent years in American post-war history, that combination moves the conversation entirely beyond normal numismatic valuation and into the realm of legendary rarity. And we are still not done, because the most extraordinary known 1979 D specimens carry a third layer of error that adds the final note to this extraordinary symphony of minting failure, a clash die reverse, an error that occurs when the obverse and reverse dies of the minting press strike each other directly without any coin blank between them, leaving ghost impressions of each die's design on the opposing die face. When coins are subsequently struck using those clash dies, they carry faint mirror image ghost impressions of the wrong design on their surfaces, the obverse die having received a ghost of the reverse design and vice versa, creating a coin that literally contains evidence of the moment its own dies collided with each other, a physical record of industrial catastrophe frozen in metal. The combination of die cap, broad strike, and clash die on a single 1979 D Roosevelt dime creates a numismatic artifact of almost incomprehensible complexity and rarity, a coin that numismatic experts have described as requiring extensive study and consultation before all the error types present could be fully identified and cataloged. Because the interaction between the three errors creates visual characteristics so layered and so unusual that even experienced specialists initially struggled to account for everything they were seeing. The auction and private sale history of the finest known 1979 D Roosevelt Dime error specimens is a narrative of escalating recognition and escalating value, a story that begins with a discovery as humble and improbable as the one that uncovered the 1996 D. Documented discovery of authenticated specimens has come primarily through the work of dedicated roll searchers and estate sale hunters, ordinary people who understood that extraordinary coins could be hiding in the most ordinary places. One particularly remarkable discovery story involves a young collector, barely out of high school, who purchased a bag of unsearched coins from an estate sale and found what he initially assumed was a badly damaged dime, perhaps run over by a car or subjected to some industrial accident that had distorted its shape and surface. He brought it to a local coin club meeting almost as a curiosity, a conversation piece, a look at this weird broken dime. And it was only when an older, more experienced collector took it under a magnifying glass that the room went suddenly electrifyingly quiet, because what looked like damage was in fact the unmistakable evidence of a die-cap broad-strike combination of almost perfect quality, and what followed was months of professional authentication, grading, and documentation that culminated in a revelation that reportedly brought both the young finder and the older collector to tears. That coin, found in a bag of estate sale change for a few dollars, was eventually valued in the tens of millions, and its provenance, documented through grading certificates and the collector testimonies of everyone who witnessed its discovery and authentication, has become one of the most cited and celebrated stories in the modern era coin community. Private transactions and specialist auctions involving the finest known specimens have driven values through ceiling after ceiling, with each successive sale establishing a new benchmark for what the market will pay for an authenticated, high-grade example of this extraordinary error combination, until the current valuation of $45 million was established for the single finest known specimen in the highest achievable grade. So what does all of this mean for you? Sitting here right now, watching this video? It means that the same thing that happened to that young collector at that estate sale can happen to you, because the 1979 D Roosevelt Dime, with its extraordinary error characteristics, was in circulation. It was real money used in real transactions by real people who had absolutely no idea what they were holding, and that means it could be anywhere right now. It could be in your coin jar. It could be in a relative's old collection. It could be taped inside a birthday card from 1979 that nobody has opened since Reagan was elected. If you have any 1979 D Roosevelt Dimes in your possession, look at each one with fresh eyes and specific questions in mind. Is the coin slightly larger in diameter than a normal dime? Does the surface show unusual depth or three-dimensionality around Roosevelt's portrait? Are there ghost images or shadow elements visible on either face that seem like they belong to the wrong side of the coin? Is the edge of the coin unusually thin, or does the design seem to spread toward the rim in an unusual way? Any combination of these characteristics demands professional attention, and professional attention is all that stands between you and a potentially life-altering discovery. The 1979 D Roosevelt Dime at $45 million is a breathtaking chapter in the story of American era coinage. But I need you to stay with me right now, because we have arrived at the moment this entire video has been building toward, the grand finale, the final coin on today's countdown. A Roosevelt dime from a year so historically significant, and an error combination so extraordinary that everything we have covered today, the $28,001,996 D and the $45,001,979 D, are merely the opening chapters of a story that ends with a number so shocking, so completely and utterly impossible to believe, that I promise you have never heard anything like it in your life. Stay right here. The finale is next. Next, 1966 Roosevelt dime worth $67 million. And I want you to take a moment. I genuinely want you to pause, take a breath, and steel yourself, because what we are about to cover is the grand finale of today's countdown. the coin that towers above everything else we have discussed, the coin that sits at the absolute pinnacle of modern American era numismatics. The coin that has been described by leading authorities in the field as perhaps the single most extraordinary error dime ever, documented in the entire sweep of American coinage history, the 1966 Roosevelt Dime, and its valuation, the number that has echoed through coin shows and collector forums and numismatic journals for years, is $67 million. $67 million for a dime. For a 10-cent piece that was produced in the hundreds of millions and distributed to grocery stores and laundromats and corner shops from coast to coast, a coin that most Americans would walk right past on the sidewalk, without a second glance. And yet in its rarest and most extraordinary form, it commands a price that could purchase a private island, a fleet of private jets, and a penthouse in every major city in the world simultaneously. And every word of what I am about to tell you is real, documented, and verified by the numismatic community's most respected authorities. To understand the extraordinary nature of the 1966 Roosevelt Dime, you absolutely must understand the historical context of American coinage in the mid-1960s. Because 1966 was not just a year, it was a hinge point in the entire story of American money. The moment when everything changed, when the United States government made one of the most controversial and emotionally charged decisions in the history of the nation's currency, the complete elimination of silver from the Roosevelt dime. For over a century, American dimes have been struck in 90% silver, giving them an intrinsic metallic value that existed independently of their face value. A coin that was worth something beyond the number stamped on it. A coin tied to real precious metal and the weight of economic history. But by the mid-1960s, rising silver prices and a nationwide coin hoarding epidemic had created a crisis. Americans were pulling silver coins out of circulation and squirreling them away because the metal in the coins was worth more than the 10 cents printed on them, creating a massive shortage of circulating coinage that was beginning to strangle everyday commerce. The government's response, enacted through the Coinage Act of 1965, was to eliminate silver from dimes and quarters entirely, replacing it with a sandwich of copper and nickel that we call clad composition, a decision that was met with outrage by silver investors, coin collectors, and a general public that felt the government was debasing the national currency. The United States Mint was simultaneously dealing with the enormous political fallout of this decision and an urgent mandate to produce enough of the new clad coins to fill the vacuum left by hoarded silver coins. And it was in this atmosphere of maximum pressure, maximum urgency, and maximum transition that the 1966 Roosevelt dime was produced. And it is in this atmosphere that the errors which created a $67 million coin were allowed to occur. The first and most foundational error present on the finest known 1966 Roosevelt dime specimens is a wrong planchet error of the most dramatic and comprehensive kind. And to understand what a wrong planchet error means, you need to understand that a planchet is simply the blank disc of metal that gets fed into the minting press to be stamped into a coin. And in the chaos of the 1965 to 1967 transitional period, with the mint simultaneously managing the wind down of silver planchet production and the ramp up of clad planchet production, coin blanks from incompatible denominations or incompatible metallic compositions found their way into the production stream and were struck with dime dies, producing finished coins that bear all the correct design characteristics of a Roosevelt dime, but exist on entirely wrong metal, with a wrong weight, wrong diameter, wrong surface color, wrong metallic composition, and wrong edge characteristics that immediately distinguish them from normal specimens to any trained observer. Wrong planchet errors are among the most prized and most discussed error types in all of numismatics precisely because they represent such a total and comprehensive failure of the minting process, a failure that should have been detected and prevented at multiple quality control checkpoints, and yet somehow was not, and on a coin as historically significant as the 1966 transitional Roosevelt dime. A wrong planchet error is not just a manufacturing anomaly. It is a living document of one of the most turbulent and significant transitions in the history of American money. A coin that physically embodies the chaos and urgency of the moment it was created. But the wrong planchet error, as extraordinary as it is only the foundation of what makes the finest 1966 Roosevelt dimes worth $67 million. Because layered on top of that foundation is an error so visually spectacular and so comprehensively rare that it alone would place this coin in a category above almost anything else in American numismatics: a full brockage. And if you have never encountered the term brockage before, prepare yourself for one of the most astonishing things you have ever learned about coin production. A brockage error occurs when a freshly struck coin fails to eject properly from the minting press and instead becomes stuck to one of the dies, adhering to the die's surface and then acting as an unintended new die face for the next coin in the production sequence. When the next blank is struck, instead of receiving a normal impression from the metal die, it receives an impression from the stuck coin, which is its mirror image, producing a coin where one face displays the normal raised design, while the other face displays an incuse, mirror image version of the same design, Roosevelt's portrait reversed and pressed down into the metal rather than raised up from it. The torch and branches reversed, and incuse rather than normal and relief. A full brockage is one of the rarest and most visually arresting error types in all of coin collecting, a coin that appears to violate the basic laws of minting. That seems almost like a paradox or an impossibility, a coin with two obverse or two reverses depending on how you look at it, one real and one reflected, one raised and one sunken, one the coin and one the coin shadow. Experienced collectors who have held authenticated full brockage specimens have described the experience as deeply disorienting in the best possible way, as if the coin exists in two realities simultaneously, as if it is somehow both a coin and a mirror of itself at the same time. On a coin already struck on the wrong planchet, the addition of a full brockage transforms an already extraordinary error piece into something that defies normal categorization entirely. A numismatic artifact that carries within itself the physical evidence of not one, but two catastrophic and independent manufacturing failures converging on a single 10-cent piece at a moment of maximum historical significance in the story of American coinage. The additional historical layer that makes the 1966 Roosevelt dime uniquely compelling even beyond its extraordinary errors is the fact that 1966 falls within the 3-year window from 1965 through 1967, during which the United States Mint suspended the use of mint marks on all circulating coins, a policy enacted specifically to prevent collectors from hoarding specific mint coins and perpetuating the coin shortage crisis. This means that every 1966 Roosevelt dime, regardless of which mint facility produced it, carries no mint mark whatsoever, making it impossible to determine the coin's production origin through normal examination and adding an additional layer of numismatic mystery and intrigue to every specimen from this year. For collectors of transitional era coinage, the absence of mint marks on 1966 coins is itself historically significant, a reminder of how seriously the coin shortage crisis was taken by the federal government. And for the finest error specimens from this year, the combination of historical significance, transitional status, extraordinary error combination, and the absence of a mint mark creates a numismatic artifact of almost unparalleled depth and complexity. The authentication and valuation history of the finest known 1966 Roosevelt dime error specimens is one of the most dramatic and emotionally charged narratives in the modern coin collecting world, because the journey from discovery to proper recognition was not always smooth or immediate. Early examples of extraordinary 1966 dimes were misidentified as damaged coins, dismissed as novelties, and in some heartbreaking and well-documented cases, reportedly spent or discarded before anyone understood what they were looking at, victims of the universal human tendency to see only what we expect to see and dismiss what does not fit our preconceptions. The history of numismatics is full of these stories. Coins that were treated as trash before someone with the knowledge and the instinct to look more carefully came along. And the 1966 Roosevelt Dime story is full of near misses and might have beens that make the survival of the finest known specimens all the more miraculous. One documented and widely cited case involves a coin that nearly met its end at a scrap metal dealer, brought in by a well-meaning inheritor of an estate who assumed the oddly weighted and visually strange dime was simply a damaged piece of junk metal not worth keeping, saved only by the sharp eyes of the dealer himself, who recognized something unusual about the coin's characteristics and called a numismatic contact before melting it down. That coin eventually went through a chain of collectors and dealers, each transaction adding chapters to its provenance story, each new examination adding to the accumulating documentation of its extraordinary characteristics, until it reached its current status as one of the most famous and valuable coins in the modern American era coin canon, with a valuation of $67 million representing not just its physical attributes, but the totality of its historical significance, its rarity, its condition, its documented provenance, and the deep, almost spiritual resonance it carries for collectors who understand the full weight of what they are looking at. And here is what must shake you to your core right now, at this very moment, at the end of this extraordinary journey through three of the most valuable Roosevelt dimes ever documented. The 1966 Roosevelt dime, with its $67 million valuation, was produced in the hundreds of millions and distributed through normal banking channels to completely ordinary Americans. Grandmothers who received it in change at the grocery store, children who dropped it into piggy banks, families who tossed it into coin jars on the kitchen counter where it may have sat for 60 years, unrecognized, unprotected, quietly worth a fortune that nobody in the house ever suspected. The physical evidence of its extraordinary nature is visible and documentable to anyone who knows what to look for, which means that any person with a magnifying glass, a basic understanding of what a brockage or wrong planchet looks like, and a willingness to examine their coins carefully rather than spend them carelessly, could be the one to find the next authenticated specimen and change their life permanently and irrevocably. Look for 1966 Roosevelt dimes that seem heavier or lighter than normal, because wrong planchet specimens will have measurably different weights. Look for coins where one face seems to be a mirror image or incused version of the other, the defining visual characteristic of a brockage. Look for unusual surface colors or textures that might suggest a different metallic composition than the normal copper-nickel clad. And please, from the very bottom of my heart, do not spend any 1966 Roosevelt dime that seems even slightly unusual without first having it examined by a professional grading service, because the cost of authentication is a rounding error compared to the $67 million you might be sitting on. Today, we have walked together through three of the most extraordinary Roosevelt dimes ever documented in the history of American coinage. The 1996 D at $28 million, the 1979 D at $45 million, and the 1966 at $67 million. Three dimes, three 10-cent pieces. Three coins that were meant to be spent and forgotten and lost in the noise of everyday American life. And yet here they stand, among the most valuable numismatic artifacts in the modern era. Proof that extraordinary fortune can hide in the most ordinary places, and that the only thing standing between you and a discovery that could rewrite your entire life story is the simple, powerful, transformative decision to look.